I am Liam, 26 years old. 2 years ago, I collapsed on a heavy oak stage in front of 3,000 people right in the middle of my college valedictorian speech. While I was being rushed into emergency brain surgery, bleeding onto a pristine white hospital gurney with paramedics shouting medical codes over my unconscious body, the hospital staff called my parents 67 times. They ignored every single call. Instead, my mother posted a perfectly filtered picture from the base of the Eiffel Tower with the caption, "No stress, no drama." They laughed and drank expensive vintage champagne while a neurosurgeon literally sawed into my skull to save my life. But there is one massive thing they didn't know. My grandfather had just hired a brilliant, ruthless lawyer and uncovered their massive, unforgivable theft involving my hidden college fund. And right now, their bank accounts are completely frozen. Their precious custom-ordered Porsche is on the line, and they are desperately begging for my help from across the globe. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I brought their entire fake empire crashing down, hit that like button if you believe in absolute justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Now, let's go back to the exact second where my old life ended and my new one began. The microphone hit the floor before I did. I remember that specific, haunting detail with a strange, terrifying clarity. The hollow, aggressive metallic crack of the heavy microphone against the polished wooden stage. It was followed instantly by a sharp, piercing squeal of audio feedback that cut through the heavy, humid air of the Whitmore Auditorium like a physical blade. I remember the massive, vaulted ceiling of the auditorium tilting sideways in a slow, unnatural motion, a way ceilings are absolutely not supposed to tilt. I was mid-sentence. I was on paragraph 4 of my carefully drafted valedictorian speech. It was the paragraph specifically about resilience. I was talking about overcoming unseen obstacles, about pushing through the barriers that life throws in your path. In retrospect, that is either the cruelest, most twisted irony the universe could possibly concoct, or exactly the right place for my body to finally surrender. The heat in the room under that heavy, dark graduation gown had been suffocating all morning. I had been sweating profusely, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. But the darkness that took over my vision wasn't hot. It was freezing cold. It started at the very edges of my peripheral sight, a creeping, inky blackness that rapidly swallowed the proud faces of my classmates in the front rows, then devoured the blinding stage lights, and finally, extinguished my own consciousness. I didn't feel myself hit the floor. There was just nothing, a complete, terrifying, absolute void. I woke up 3 days later in the intensive care unit of St. Marcus Medical Center. The transition from that dark nothingness back to reality was not gentle. It felt like being dragged backward underwater through a bed of sharp gravel. The very first thing I registered was the mechanical, rhythmic, terrifying hiss of a ventilator somewhere close to my right ear, followed immediately by the tight, relentless squeeze of a blood pressure cuff inflating heavily on my left arm. The harsh, sterile smell of medical-grade antiseptic, iodine, and rubbing alcohol burned the back of my throat with every single shallow, agonizing breath I managed to take. A woman in dark blue scrubs, a nurse whose name tag was just a blurry white rectangle to my unfocused eyes, was leaning over me. She was checking my pupils with a blindingly bright penlight that sent sharp spikes of pain directly into my brain. I tried to speak. I wanted to ask where I was, what day it was, but my mouth was stuffed with what felt like dry cotton, and my throat felt like it had been scraped raw with sandpaper. But then, through the haze of heavy narcotics and deep, radiating bone pain, I felt something else. My right hand was enveloped in a grip so tight, so completely anchored and immovable, it felt like a heavy iron cast had been poured over my fingers. I slowly turned my head, fighting through a thick, heavy fog that threatened to pull me back under, and I saw my grandfather, Arthur. He was still wearing the dark navy suit he had meticulously pressed for my graduation ceremony 3 days prior. The silk pocket square I had personally helped him fold that very morning. A morning that now felt like it belonged to a different lifetime, was still tucked into his breast pocket, slightly crumpled and stained with what looked like coffee. He hadn't left that chair. He looked like a man who had been holding up a collapsing building with his bare hands for 72 hours straight. He was 76 years old, but in that sterile, unforgiving fluorescent hospital light, he looked incredibly fragile, aged by pure terror. His face was deeply lined with a kind of profound exhaustion that goes far beyond simply missing sleep. "There he is," he said. His voice was incredibly quiet, almost like a desperate prayer he was whispering to himself in an empty church. He didn't smile. He couldn't. He just squeezed my hand harder, seemingly trying to transfer his own remaining physical strength directly into my veins. It took me another 20 minutes of confused, groggy, terrifying questioning to understand the brutal reality of what had happened to my body. I had survived an emergency craniotomy. A massive brain tumor had been secretly growing inside my head, hiding behind what I thought was just exhaustion. As my mind started to clear, finally pushing past the heavy veil of painkillers, the silence in the hospital room began to feel incredibly loud. It was a heavy, unnatural, suffocating silence. I looked past my grandfather, staring directly at the heavy wooden door of the ICU room, expecting it to burst open at any given second. I expected my mother's dramatic wailing, the kind of theatrical performance she always put on whenever she needed to be the center of attention. I expected my father's nervous pacing, his constant checking of his expensive gold watch while complaining about the hospital parking fees. I expected the overwhelming, suffocating presence of my family crowding the room, suffocating me with their chaotic energy. The room remained completely empty, save for the blinking medical monitors, the quiet hum of the industrial air conditioning, and the old man sitting steadfastly beside my bed. I gestured weakly toward the rolling bedside table where my smartphone sat plugged into a white charging cable. My grandfather hesitated. His hand hovered over the device. His eyes darted away, staring fixedly at the blank television screen mounted high on the wall. He knew exactly what I was about to find on that screen, and he couldn't bear to watch the realization hit my face. He handed the phone to me anyway, his hand trembling slightly. I tapped the screen. The sudden brightness made me wince, but the red notification numbers glowing on the glass cut straight through the physical pain and went directly into my core. 65 missed calls. 31 from my dad. 22 from my mom. 12 from my older brother, Julian. There were no voicemails. Not a single one. There was only one text message, sent by my father at exactly 6:47 that morning. It read, "We need you. Answer immediately." I stared at the glowing white letters until they blurred together into a meaningless, harsh line of light. Not, "We are rushing to the hospital." Not, "We are so incredibly sorry we weren't there when you fell." Not even a basic, minimum effort human "How are you doing, son?" Simply said, "We need you." Present tense. Active voice. The subject of the sentence was them. It was always them. My hands were perfectly still on the thin, scratchy hospital blanket. I noticed the complete absence of shaking. I expected to tremble. I expected to weep uncontrollably into my pillow. But what I felt in that exact moment wasn't blinding rage. Not yet. It was a cold, dark, absolute realization settling permanently into my bones. It was the heavy, undeniable drop of a truth I had been actively avoiding for my entire adult life. To truly understand why that incredibly selfish text message didn't make me cry, to understand the absolute emotional wasteland I grew up in, you need to understand the toxic environment that built me. My family looked absolutely perfect on paper. We were the quintessential American suburban success story, the kind of incredibly fake family you see smiling in stock photos for lucrative life insurance brochures. We lived in a sprawling, immaculately maintained colonial house at the very end of a quiet, exclusive cul-de-sac. My father, Robert, was a high-level financial advisor. He was a man who pulled in a very comfortable salary managing other people's retirement portfolios, securing their 401k plans, and projecting an aura of total, unshakable financial stability to his wealthy clients. But behind our heavy mahogany front doors, he was astonishingly reckless with his own money. My mother, Evelyn, was an independent interior designer with tastes that completely and willfully ignored the concept of a household budget. She treated our home like a constantly revolving, high-end showroom. They lived entirely for outward appearances. They lived for the lavish country club dinners where my father could aggressively network, the neighborhood HOA meetings where my mother could boast about her latest imported Italian kitchen tile, and the pristine, manicured front lawn that signaled their superior status to the rest of the street. And then there was my older brother, Julian, the undisputed golden child. 4 years older than me, Julian was the absolute center of our family's entire solar system. He wasn't particularly smart, and he wasn't particularly driven by any actual ambition, but he possessed a certain arrogant, easygoing charm that my parents utterly adored and constantly rewarded. Every single one of our elaborate Thanksgiving dinners was essentially a dedicated shrine to Julian's incredibly mediocre achievements. When Julian barely made the junior varsity lacrosse team in high school, my parents surprised him in the driveway with a brand new car. A shiny, ridiculous, bright red sports coupe that cost more than some people make in an entire year of grueling labor. When Julian barely managed to scrape together the grades to get accepted to a mid-tier state college, after my father basically badgered the admissions office daily and made a very sizable anonymous donation to the university athletics department, they threw a massive, catered party in our backyard that rivaled a luxury wedding reception. There were massive ice sculptures melting on the buffet tables. There was a live jazz band playing on our patio. When I received my official acceptance letter to Alderman University 4 years later, carrying a highly coveted, full-ride academic scholarship for a brutally competitive biochemistry degree, I walked into our designer kitchen, the thick envelope trembling in my hand, my heart hammering with desperate pride, hoping for just an ounce of their validation. My mother looked up from her expensive iPad, gave a tight, thin-lipped smile that didn't even come close to reaching her eyes, and said, "That's great, honey. Make sure you don't track mud on the new Persian rug when you take out the trash." I used to lie awake at night in my small bedroom, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I was so thoroughly invisible to them. I spent years trying to solve the complex, painful equation of my own worthlessness. The answer, which my grandfather Arthur finally confirmed to me when I was much older, was brutally, devastatingly simple. I looked exactly like my late grandmother, Beatrice. Grandma Beatrice was my father's mother, and she was a force of nature. She saw right through Evelyn's superficial, money-hungry facade from the very first day they met. Beatrice was a sharp, fiercely independent, no-nonsense woman who used to constantly and publicly call out my mother's frivolous spending habits and her terrible, blatantly neglectful parenting toward me. When Beatrice passed away, her funeral was a tense, quiet, incredibly uncomfortable affair. My mother didn't shed a single solitary tear. Instead, on the car ride home from the cemetery, she immediately started badgering my father about the inheritance and the prime commercial real estate Beatrice had left behind. There was a brief, incredibly ugly custody battle over some priceless antique family heirlooms that my mother felt entirely entitled to, simply by marriage. She took all that built-up, toxic resentment, all that festering hatred she held for Beatrice, and projected it directly onto me simply because I had the sheer audacity to inherit Beatrice's dark, piercing eyes and sharp jawline. I was punished every single day for the perceived sins of a dead woman who had only ever spoken the truth. Because of this deeply ingrained dynamic, I learned early on that if I wanted absolutely anything in life, I had to bleed for it myself. I moved out the morning after my high school graduation. I packed exactly 2 canvas duffel bags, left my house key on the gleaming kitchen counter, and walked out the front door without a single goodbye. Throughout my 4 years at Alderman University, I didn't just study. I survived in a constant, agonizing state of fight or flight. My academic scholarship thankfully covered the massive tuition bill, but I had to keep a roof over my head, pay for incredibly expensive lab materials, and keep enough food in my stomach to stay conscious during lectures. I worked 30 to 40 hours a week across 3 different, exhausting jobs. I was the morning barista at a busy campus coffee shop, dealing with rude, entitled customers at 5 in the morning, constantly smelling like roasted beans and sour milk, while trying to memorize complex chemical structures on napkin scraps between serving lattes. I spent my weekends as a lab assistant in a private research facility, cleaning dirty beakers, sanitizing equipment, and logging endless rows of mundane data until my eyes burned and my vision literally blurred. And in the evenings, I tutored wealthy, lazy underclassmen in organic chemistry, desperately trying to keep them from failing out so I could afford my monthly electric bill. I slept an average of 5 hours a night, often passing out directly on top of my textbooks. My diet consisted entirely of cheap, sodium-packed ramen noodles, discounted bread from late-night Walmart runs, and the occasional leftover, stale pastry from the coffee shop that the manager secretly let me take home. I remember vividly standing in the aisle of a discount shoe store during the bitter winter of my sophomore year. My old sneakers were completely worn through the soles, the freezing, wet pavement constantly touching my bare feet. I spent 45 minutes standing there, calculating to the exact penny whether I could afford a $30 pair of generic, off-brand shoes without bouncing a check for my rent. I put the shoes back on the shelf. I walked home in the snow and taped the holes in my old sneakers with silver duct tape. While I was doing this, while I was literally starving and freezing, Julian was living in a luxury apartment downtown, entirely funded by my parents. They paid his exorbitant rent, his premium car insurance, and his endless, maxed-out credit card bills while he bounced between entry-level marketing jobs, constantly bragging at family dinners about his next big promotion that never actually materialized. The only bright light in my life, the only genuine, unconditional family I had, was Grandpa Arthur. He had built a small, blue-collar manufacturing business from the ground up in the 70s, sold it for a modest, comfortable sum, and spent the rest of his life being the most quietly decent, honorable man I ever knew. He absolutely despised status symbols. He proudly drove a 10-year-old Buick that rattled violently whenever it hit 50 miles per hour on the highway. He packed his own turkey sandwiches for lunch instead of eating at expensive downtown bistros with the other retirees. He was the one who checked in on me. He was the one who drove 2 hours every other weekend just to take me to a quiet, greasy diner so I could have one hot, filling meal a week that didn't come out of a microwave. Every time he looked at me across that sticky diner table, I saw absolute pride. Real, unfiltered, deep pride. During my senior year, as the immense physical fatigue began to completely crush my body, I started getting headaches. Blinding, localized, terrifying spikes of pain behind my right eye that made me nauseous. I aggressively chalked it up to stress. I blamed the 3 jobs. I blamed the massive 100-page senior thesis I was writing on cellular degradation. I popped over-the-counter ibuprofen like candy and pushed through the thick, suffocating brain fog. I couldn't afford to be sick. I didn't have the luxury of weakness. The morning of my graduation, Grandpa Arthur came to my tiny, cramped apartment to help me get ready. As he carefully adjusted my cheap, clip-on tie, his rough hands lingered heavily on my shoulders. He had this look in his eye, a complex, intense mix of deep sorrow and fierce, unwavering determination. "I have something incredibly important to tell you after the ceremony, Liam," he had said, his voice unusually grave and steady. "I've prepared everything. Your life is going to change completely today. I promise you." I thought he meant a graduation gift. Maybe a few $100s to help me transition into the real world and finally buy a decent pair of shoes. I smiled, hugged him tightly, and walked out the door toward the auditorium. I never got to hear what he had to say, because 2 hours later, I was unconscious on the wooden floor, my brain swelling dangerously against my skull. The stark, terrifying reality of the hospital room finally settled deep into my bones, replacing the lingering confusion with raw fear. The heavy metal door opened, and Dr. Sarah Vance walked in. She was the chief of neurosurgery at St. Marcus, a woman with sharp, highly intelligent eyes and an aura of absolute, uncompromising medical competence. She didn't offer fake sympathy or sweet, patronizing bedside words. She offered cold, hard medical facts, and I respected her instantly for it. She pulled up a cheap plastic chair, sat down, and looked me dead in the eye. "Liam," she started, her voice steady and purely professional, "you have a glioblastoma. It's a highly aggressive, malignant brain tumor. It was sitting deep in your right temporal lobe, roughly the size of a standard golf ball. Based on the pathology reports we expedited, It had been growing quietly right under the radar for at least a year, maybe two. I felt the blood drain rapidly from my face, leaving my skin feeling like ice. A brain tumor, cancer, all those blinding headaches, all those times I ruthlessly, mercilessly berated myself for being lazy, for lacking focus during my shifts, for needing too much sleep while an actual physical mass was slowly crushing my brain tissue. We performed an emergency craniotomy, Dr. Vance continued, holding a thick medical clipboard tightly against her chest. You were on the operating table, your skull completely open, for 4 hours and 11 minutes. You lost a significant, dangerous amount of blood. We had to intubate you immediately upon arrival. Because of the highly critical nature of the surgery, the hospital social worker and the nursing staff called your emergency contacts, your parents, 67 times over the course of the first 48 hours to get medical consent and to inform them that you might not make it through the night. She paused. Her carefully constructed professional mask slipped just a fraction of an inch to reveal a glint of genuine, visceral human disgust. They never answered the phone. Not once. After Dr. Vance left the room, leaving behind a thick, terrifying stack of glossy pamphlets about intense radiation and aggressive chemotherapy protocols, I looked over at Grandpa Arthur. He looked older than I had ever seen him, frilier. His shoulders slumped heavily under the weight of an invisible, crushing burden. Where are they? I asked. My voice sounded terrible, like crushed glass grinding together in my throat. Grandpa Arthur reached into his tailored jacket pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and opened the Instagram app. He didn't say a single word. He didn't offer a polite excuse or try to soften the blow. He just handed the glowing phone directly to me. It was my mother's completely public profile. A high-resolution photo posted at exactly 11:47 p.m. on the exact day I went into the operating room. It was a perfectly framed, professionally lit picture of my mother, my father, and Julian standing at the base of the brilliantly illuminated Eiffel Tower in Paris. They were holding up tall crystal champagne flutes, toasting directly to the camera lens. My mother was wearing a brand-new, clearly expensive designer silk scarf, laughing with her head thrown back. A full, uninhibited, incredibly joyous laugh she never, ever displayed inside the walls of our home. The caption read, "Finally, the Paris family trip. No stress, no drama. Just living our absolute best lives in the city of light." Below it, a glowing comment from one of her wealthy country club friends. "You deserve this getaway so much, Evelyn. Enjoy the luxury." My mother's reply, tagged with a sparkling heart emoji. "We absolutely do. Life is too short." I handed the phone back to Arthur. The silence in the ICU room was absolute, deafening, and suffocating. My own flesh and blood, the people who brought me into this world, had willingly boarded a transatlantic flight while a highly trained surgeon was cutting my skull open. They had actively, consciously chosen champagne, luxury shopping, and social media photo ops over the life of their dying son. "They knew," Grandpa Arthur said quietly, staring fixedly at the scuffed linoleum floor. "Your cousin called me the night of your surgery, frantic. She told them everything before they even arrived at the boarding gate. They knew you collapsed on stage. They knew you were in critical, life-threatening condition. They actively chose to turn their phones completely off." I closed my eyes tight. The betrayal was absolute, complete, and stunningly final. It was a deep physical ache in my chest, a tearing, burning sensation sharper than the dozens of metal staples currently holding my scalp together. But it wasn't the end. The real storm, the hurricane that would tear the very foundation of my family apart, hadn't even begun to hit the shore. "Liam," Grandpa Arthur said. His tone shifted completely. The deep, mourning sorrow vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, hardened, terrifying steel I had never heard from this gentle man before. He sat up straighter in his chair. "There is something else. The thing I was going to tell you in your apartment after your graduation." I opened my eyes and forced my blurry vision to focus entirely on his face. He pulled his chair closer to the hospital bed, leaning in until he was mere inches away. "Before your grandmother Beatrice died, She sat down with her lawyers and set up a trust. A massive college fund specifically designated for you and only you. She explicitly, legally stated in the binding documents that your parents were to have absolutely no access to it under any circumstances whatsoever. It was meant to give you a massive head start in life, to protect you from Evelyn's greed. By the time you started your freshman year at Alderman, that carefully managed fund had grown to over $340,000. I stopped breathing. My lungs froze. The heart monitors beside me beeped a sudden, rapid, shrill warning before I forced myself to aggressively inhale and calm my racing pulse down. $340,000. While I was physically starving. While I was wrapping my worn-out shoes in silver duct tape. While I was crying from sheer, agonizing exhaustion in the dark back room of a coffee shop. Your father knew about it, Arthur continued, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with an intense, furious anger. 4 years ago, right before your freshman semester started, Robert came to my house. He looked me dead in the eye and swore to God that your academic scholarship had fallen through at the absolute last minute due to a clerical error. He said you were desperate, crying hysterically, and that you needed the tuition money immediately or you couldn't enroll. He begged me to release the funds directly to him so he could personally pay the university. I had a full ride. I stammered, my mind spinning violently, trying to process the magnitude of the lie. I never paid a single dime in tuition. Not one. I know that perfectly well now, Arthur said bitterly, shaking his head. But I implicitly trusted my own son-in-law. I truly thought he was trying to protect you. Over the course of your 4 years at college, Robert came to me 4 separate times. He cited incredibly expensive lab fees, sudden housing crises, exorbitant necessary textbooks. I wrote the checks, for massive checks, totaling exactly $153,000. The room started to spin again, the edges of my vision darkening. $153,000 stolen directly from my future, from my blood. Where did the money go? I whispered. Arthur's eyes turned absolutely glacial. I hired a private investigator in March, an elite forensic accountant. I got the subpoenaed bank records. That money never went anywhere near Alderman University. He reached into his jacket, pulled a neatly folded piece of thick paper from his inside pocket, and flattened it out aggressively on the hospital bed. It was a highly detailed, printed financial spreadsheet. Year 1. Arthur pointed a shaking, furious finger at the top line. $41,000. It went directly into a joint home renovation account. That custom imported Italian marble kitchen island your mother constantly bragged about on Facebook? The one she wouldn't let you touch? You paid for it. He moved his finger down the page. Year 2. $38,000. That covered the massive down payment and the entire first year of lease payments for Julian's luxury apartment downtown. Your brother lived in luxury on your dime. My vision blurred with a sudden, violent, all-consuming rage. It was a hot, terrifying fire. I gripped the thin hospital blanket until my knuckles turned completely white, the muscles in my forearms screaming. And year 3, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal, absolutely terrifying whisper. $74,000. They walked into a luxury car dealership and bought a brand new, custom-ordered Porsche Cayenne. Evelyn's daily driver. Paid in full, in cash, using the exact money Beatrice left to guarantee your future. I couldn't speak. I literally could not command my vocal cords to form words. My throat closed up entirely. Every single time my mother had driven past me in that pristine white Porsche while I waited in the freezing, pouring rain for the public bus to get to my morning barista shift, she was driving my blood. She was driving my sweat, my brutal sleep deprivation, my stolen future. They hadn't just neglected me. They hadn't just ignored me. They had actively, maliciously, and systematically cannibalized my life to fund their disgusting arrogance. I lay completely, terrifyingly still in the hospital bed. The rhythmic, steady, electronic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the suffocating room. For 22 years, I had allowed them to make me feel incredibly, profoundly small. I had accepted the pathetic, insulting scraps of affection they occasionally threw my way, genuinely believing deeply in my core that I was somehow inherently flawed, that I deserved to be the outcast, the burden of the family. But this revelation shifted the entire axis of my universe. This wasn't bad parenting. This wasn't simple, thoughtless neglect. This was a highly calculated, malicious financial slaughter. I looked down at the glowing text message on my phone screen again. The one from my father that had arrived at exactly 6:47 a.m. Paris time. "We need you. Answer immediately." Suddenly, the fragmented pieces snapped together in my mind with terrifying, absolute clarity. The puzzle was completely finished, and the picture it formed was utterly sickening. "They didn't text me because they found out about the brain surgery, did they?" I asked, my voice eerily calm, completely devoid of all the frantic panic I had felt just an hour ago. The tone of my own voice surprised me. It sounded like a stranger. Grandpa Arthur shook his head slowly, a grim, incredibly dark smile touching the corners of his mouth. "No. Yesterday afternoon, while you were still completely unconscious on the ventilator, my estate lawyer, Marcus Thorne, executed the strict, unyielding legal orders I gave him before your graduation. He officially and permanently froze the remaining balance of the trust. Furthermore, he filed an emergency, airtight injunction on your parents' bank accounts based on the forensic evidence of massive wire fraud and the gross misappropriation of designated trust funds." A dark, incredibly grim, deeply satisfying warmth bloomed deep in my chest. The intense heat of it chased away the cold, sterile reality of the hospital room. "Their accounts are frozen." "Everything?" Arthur confirmed, heavily tapping the printed spreadsheet on my bed. "Their primary checking, their savings, their joint accounts, their investment portfolios. Marcus even managed to put a provisional legal lien on the house and the Porsche pending a formal civil lawsuit. They are currently stranded in Paris with completely maxed out credit cards and absolutely zero access to liquid cash. They found out yesterday morning when Evelyn's premium card was violently, publicly declined at a high-end designer boutique near the Louvre. That was it. That was the naked, incredibly ugly reality of my family. My parents weren't frantically calling because their youngest son was lying broken in a hospital bed with a stapled skull and a terrifying cancer diagnosis. They were calling because their personal ATM had been abruptly shut off. They needed me, the naive, desperate for love, easily manipulated son they thought they controlled entirely, to call Grandpa Arthur and hysterically beg him to lift the freeze. They wanted to use my voice, my trauma, to unlock their stolen money. They wanted to manipulate me one last, spectacular time. The profound, heavy sadness I had carried my whole life, the desperate need for their approval, evaporated instantly. It was gone, burned away. In its place, a cold, hyper-focused, incredibly dangerous machinery turned on inside my head. I wasn't the crying victim anymore. I was the architect of their absolute ruin. "I want to speak to Marcus Thorne," I said. My voice didn't waver a fraction of an inch. Within an hour, Marcus was on speakerphone, his voice echoing in the quiet room. He was an absolute shark of a lawyer, a man who spoke in precise, lethal legal terms without an ounce of unnecessary emotion or hesitation. He methodically walked me through the massive stack of documentation Arthur had provided him. We had the original canceled checks with my father's forged memo lines clearly stating Liam's tuition. We had the subpoenaed bank records showing the direct, undeniable wire transfers to the luxury car dealership and the private kitchen contractors. It was an airtight, utterly devastating case of financial fraud. "Liam," Marcus said through the phone speaker, his voice perfectly professional but tinged with deep, undeniable respect. "Listen to me very carefully. They are going to try to contact you the absolute second they land on American soil. They are going to fly back in a panic, rush straight to that hospital, and they are going to use every single emotional manipulation tactic in the book to get you to sign a legal waiver releasing them from financial liability. They will cry. They will scream. They will use the word family like a weapon to guilt you into submission. Let them try," I replied, staring intensely at the gray concrete parking garage outside my window. I felt invincible. I am currently drafting the formal civil complaint for $153,000, plus extensive legal fees, court costs, and maximum punitive damages. Marcus stated, the typing of his keyboard audible in the background. You need to deeply understand this, Liam. This lawsuit will become entirely public record. Considering your father's extremely lucrative career as a financial advisor relies entirely on public trust and strict fiduciary responsibility, a highly publicized lawsuit for defrauding his own son's family trust will end his career overnight. The regulatory boards will absolutely strip his trading licenses. Good, I said. It was a single, simple word, but it carried the immense, crushing weight of 4 years of exhaustion, starvation, and silent suffering. File it today. I want every single dime back. We spent the next 2 full hours going over the intricate battle plan. I meticulously reviewed the itemized receipts from the hospital bed, committing the exact numbers to my memory. $74,200 for the Porsche. $41,500 for the kitchen. Every single dollar they stole. Every single lie they confidently told. I was building my intellectual arsenal, carefully loading my weapon with undeniable, razor-sharp facts. By the late afternoon, the hospital staff moved me completely out of the ICU and into a private, much quieter recovery room on the oncology floor. The room was sterile and silent, with a large pane window that looked out over a gray, concrete parking garage. I found the stark, unpretentious ugliness of the concrete incredibly comforting. It was real. It was undeniably solid. It didn't pretend to be anything else, unlike the people who raised me. Grandpa Arthur went down to the hospital cafeteria to get a cup of black coffee and a sandwich. I sat completely alone in the quiet room, staring intensely at the closed wooden door. I knew with absolute certainty that they were coming. The frozen bank accounts would aggressively force them onto the very first available flight back from Paris. They would storm into this hospital demanding total obedience, fully expecting to find the weak, compliant, desperate Liam they had confidently walked all over for 22 years. Then I heard it. Through the thick, soundproofed walls of the hospital corridor, I heard the distinct, rapid, incredibly sharp click-clack of expensive designer heels hitting the polished linoleum floor. It was a proprietary, aggressive, deeply entitled walk. The unmistakable walk of a woman who genuinely believed she owned every single room she stepped into. My mother. I slowly reached up with a trembling hand and gently touched the heavy white bandages wrapped tightly around my shaved head. I felt the dull, rhythmic, agonizing throb of the surgical site pulsing against my fingers. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the cold, sterile hospital air fill my lungs completely, and squared my shoulders aggressively against the stiff pillows. The cold metal door handle began to slowly turn. I had thought the absolute worst was over when I woke up from the surgery. I was so incredibly, foolishly wrong. The tumor was out of my head, but the real cancer, the real war was just walking through that door. The heavy hospital door swung open, and the temperature in the room instantly seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother, Evelyn, walked in first. She didn't look like a woman whose youngest son had just survived a massive, life-threatening brain tumor. She looked like she was arriving late to a highly exclusive country club luncheon and was irritated about the valet parking. She was wearing a pristine, tailored beige trench coat, perfectly pressed, and a pair of dark designer sunglasses pushed up into her salon-fresh hair. Behind her came my father, Robert. He was aggressively adjusting his expensive silk tie, his eyes darting around the sterile room, assessing the medical equipment as if calculating its exact depreciation value for a tax write-off. He looked incredibly uncomfortable, not out of guilt, but because being around sickness offended his polished, upper-class sensibilities. And finally, trailing behind them like a bored teenager forced to attend a mandatory family event, was my older brother, Julian. He was actually carrying 3 stiff paper shopping bags from high-end Parisian boutiques. The thick rope handles dangled from his wrists as he aggressively tapped on his smartphone, not even looking up at me. "Oh, my sweet boy!" my mother cried out. It was a completely theatrical performance. Her voice hit that high, wavering pitch she used when she wanted the neighbors to hear her. She swept across the hospital linoleum with her arms wide open, aiming straight for my bed. She was going for the dramatic, tearful embrace, fully expecting me to melt into her arms and play the role of the grateful, weak, compliant child she could comfort for the cameras. I didn't move. I didn't raise my arms. I just stared at her with eyes as cold and dead as the concrete parking garage outside my window. She reached the side of my bed and had to awkwardly complete the hugging gesture around a body that entirely refused to participate. She patted my shoulder stiffly, pulling back with a perfectly manicured look of wounded concern. "We came as fast as we physically could, Liam," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. It was an absolute nightmare trying to get a direct flight out of Charles de Gaulle. The airline was completely unreasonable. "The Louvre was open yesterday," I said. My voice was a flat, gravelly rasp. "I saw the photos." My mother froze. Her face did something incredibly complicated. For a fraction of a second, the carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing the cold, calculating machinery underneath. Then, she quickly managed her expression, shifting into a look of deep, maternal injury. "Liam, sweetheart," she sighed, placing a hand on her chest. "We didn't know how serious it was. The hospital left these incredibly vague, automated messages. We thought you just had a fainting spell from working those ridiculous barista shifts you insist on taking." The hospital called 67 times. "Evelyn," Grandpa Arthur spoke up from the corner of the room. His voice was like a whip cracking in the quiet space. My father finally stepped forward, putting on his best financial advisor voice. The deep, reassuring tone he used to calm down wealthy clients when the stock market took a minor dip. "Arthur, please. Let's not raise our voices in a hospital. We are a family. We are here now, and that is all that matters. Liam is clearly recovering well." Julian finally looked up from his glowing screen. He took one look at the heavy bandages wrapped tightly around my shaved skull, the 4 lines snaking into my bruised arms, and the heart monitors beeping next to my bed. He tilted his head slightly, a look of mild annoyance crossing his perfectly tanned face. "Yeah, honestly, bro, you look totally fine," Julian said, dropping the heavy boutique bags onto the small visitor's sofa. "It was super scary when we finally got the voicemails, but the doctors obviously handled it. Anyway, we had to cut the Paris trip 2 whole days short to fly back, so we made a massive sacrifice to be here." I looked at Julian. I looked at the boutique bags sitting in an oncology recovery room. Something inside my chest went very, very quiet. The last lingering shred of hope I had, the pathetic, childish hope that maybe, just maybe, seeing me broken in a hospital bed would finally wake them up, died right then and there. "Sit down," I said. The absolute authority in my voice surprised even me. My father blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me?" I said. "Sit down. All of you." My mother let out a sharp, offended breath, but my father placed a warning hand on her arm. They sat down on the small sofa, wedged tightly next to Julian's shopping bags. "We need to talk about the bank accounts." My father started immediately, completely unable to help himself. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, interlocking his fingers. He was trying to take control of the narrative, trying to establish dominance. "Liam, Arthur has completely lost his mind. He has somehow managed to put a temporary illegal freeze on our primary checking and our investment portfolios. He's even threatening our real estate. This is a massive misunderstanding, and I need you to tell him to call his lawyer and drop this ridiculous injunction before I am forced to sue him for defamation." He didn't ask how the surgery went. He didn't ask if the tumor was malignant or benign. He didn't ask if I was going to live or die. He asked about his money. "It's not a misunderstanding, Robert," I said, leaning back against the stiff hospital pillows. "And Grandpa Arthur didn't do it. I did." Silence fell over the room. It was so profound, so absolute, that I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. "What are you talking about?" my mother asked, her voice losing its sweet, maternal edge, dropping into a sharp, defensive tone. You don't have the authority to do anything, Liam. You're 26 years old and you're heavily medicated. I have complete authority over my own trust fund, I replied smoothly. The college fund that Grandma Beatrice left specifically for me. The inheritance that you thought you could drain dry while I was scrubbing dirty coffee mugs at 5 in the morning. My father's face drained of all color. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for gravity to take effect. Liam, listen to me, Robert said, his voice suddenly shaking. I don't know what Arthur has been filling your head with, but every single financial decision I made was for the overall benefit of this family, as a fiduciary. Don't you dare use that word. Grandpa Arthur stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over my father. You have no concept of fiduciary duty. You are a thief, Robert. A common, pathetic thief wearing a very expensive suit. It was a family discussion. My mother suddenly shrieked, her perfect composure shattering into a million jagged pieces. She pointed a shaking finger at me. We all agreed that the household needed improvements to maintain our property value. We are the ones who put a roof over your head for 18 years. You owed us that money. I owed you nothing, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I looked directly into her eyes. You stole $153,000 from your own dying son to buy a custom Porsche. I thought the worst was over. I thought exposing the theft would be the end of it. I was so incredibly wrong. The real ugliness, the true, deeply rooted poison of my family, was about to spill out all over that sterile hospital floor. Grandpa Arthur reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He didn't hand it to my father. He tossed it onto the edge of my hospital bed. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. That envelope contains the subpoenaed bank records, I said, staring at my father, whose hands were now visibly trembling. It contains the original canceled checks with your forged memo lines. It contains the exact, itemized wire transfers to the luxury car dealership and the private kitchen contractors. We have every single receipt. Julian, who had been staring blankly at the wall, suddenly turned his head. Wait, what Porsche? Mom's Porsche? You bought that with Liam's money? My mother completely ignored Julian. She was staring at the manila envelope as if it were a live grenade. She shifted tactics instantly. I had watched her do this my entire life. When aggression failed, she pivoted to the emotional redirect. The tears came and they were real. Her chest heaved, and she buried her face in her hands. You don't understand, she sobbed, looking up at me with mascara running down her cheeks. You don't understand what it was like for me, Liam. Every single time I look at you, I see her. I see Beatrice. She pressed her manicured fingers aggressively against her mouth, trying to stifle a loud sob. She made me feel completely worthless for 30 years. Every room I walked into, every Thanksgiving dinner, every family gathering. She found something to criticize. She hated me. She wanted Robert to divorce me. And you have her exact face. You have her eyes. You judge me exactly the way she did. I am not her, I yelled, my voice finally breaking its calm facade, echoing loudly in the small room. The heart monitor beside me began to beep rapidly. I never was. I was your son. You punished a terrified, starving child for a dead woman's sins. It's not fair, my mother cried out, completely hysterical now, entirely absorbed in her own victimhood. She left all that money for you just to spite me, just to prove she was better than us. And you? I turned my furious gaze to my father, who was staring fixedly at the scuffed floor tiles. You watched her do it. You watched her treat me like garbage for 22 years, and you said absolutely nothing because it was easier for you. Because standing up to her cost you more energy than watching your own son be destroyed. And then you had the sheer, unbelievable audacity to steal my college fund to buy her loyalty. My father didn't deny it. He couldn't. That was the pathetic reality of Robert. He was a coward. He was only honest in the exact moments when his lies were no longer useful. "We are filing a formal civil lawsuit, Robert," Grandpa Arthur said, his voice cold and absolute. "My lawyer, Marcus Thorne, is filing the paperwork on Monday morning. We are going after the full $153,000, plus maximum punitive damages, legal fees, and consequential damages for the 4 years of agonizing labor Liam was forced to endure. And because it's a civil fraud case regarding a family trust, it will become public record." My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "Arthur, please, you can't do that. If a fraud lawsuit goes public, the regulatory boards will launch an investigation. My wealthy clients will pull their portfolios. I will lose my financial trading licenses. It will completely ruin my entire career." "You ruined your own career," Arthur replied without an ounce of pity. "You should have thought about the regulatory boards before you cashed the very first check." "Liam, please," my father begged, dropping his arrogant posture completely. He actually stepped forward and reached for my hand. I pulled it away in disgust. "We are family. Families make mistakes. I will pay you back. I swear to God. I will liquidate some assets. I'll figure it out, but you cannot let Arthur file that lawsuit. It will destroy us. You left me to die while you drank champagne in Paris," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are already destroyed." Right at that exact, tension-filled second, my smartphone buzzed on the bedside table. In a room suffocating with heavy drama, the sharp vibration sounded like a gunshot. Everyone froze. I picked up the phone. The caller ID displayed National Neurological Research Consortium. I took a deep breath, swiped the screen, and put the phone to my ear. "Hello, this is Liam." "Liam. Hi, it's Claire Bautista, the clinical research coordinator for Dr. Vance." A bright, energetic voice chirped through the receiver. My heart hammered against my ribs. 8 months ago, while exhausted after a grueling 6-hour barista shift, I had typed out a desperate application on my phone for a highly competitive, fully funded research fellowship. It was a prestigious 2-year position attached to a groundbreaking clinical trial studying treatment-resistant glioblastomas, the exact category of brain tumor currently residing in my skull. "Hi, Claire," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My family was watching me intensely, trying to read the situation. "I have incredible news," Claire said. "The board officially reviewed your application and your outstanding academic records from Alderman. Dr. Vance specifically and personally recommended you for the position. She said your biochemistry thesis was brilliant. We want to officially offer you the fellowship." Tears, real tears of profound relief, pricked the corners of my eyes. "The fellowship includes a full, comprehensive health insurance package," Claire continued, "which will obviously cover all of your upcoming radiation and chemotherapy treatments. It also comes with a starting salary of $58,000 a year. And because you are part of the trial, Dr. Vance will not only be your managing physician, but she will also officially be your senior colleague." I closed my eyes. The heavy, crushing weight of the last 4 years, the fear of the cancer, the terrifying medical debt I thought would drown me. It all lifted in one incredible, sweeping motion. "I accept," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Tell Dr. Vance I absolutely accept." "Thank you, Claire." I hung up the phone and set it down. A genuine, bright smile spread across my face. It was the first time my facial muscles had formed a smile in 5 days. My mother was watching me with a highly suspicious, careful expression. "Who was that?" she asked, trying to sound maternal again. "Was it the billing department? Do they need our insurance information? Because if you drop this ridiculous lawsuit, your father can." "No," I interrupted her, the smile remaining on my face. "It was good news." "Well, what is it?" my father demanded, desperate for a distraction. "Did you get a job?" I looked at the 3 of them. I looked at the people who had tried to break me, starve me, and steal my future. I realized in that golden moment that I possessed the ultimate power, the power of complete and total independence. "I'm not telling you," I said softly. Excuse me? My mother scoffed. We are your parents, Liam. We have a right to know what is going on in your life. No, Evelyn, you don't, I replied, the smile fading into a look of absolute, untouchable resolve. You lost the right to know anything about my life the second you boarded that plane. You lost it when you bought that Porsche. Some things belong entirely to me now, and I get to decide exactly what to share and with whom and when. Now, get out of my hospital room. True to his word, Marcus Thorne filed the civil claim first thing on Monday morning. Marcus was a former county prosecutor with 26 years of ruthless experience in estate and civil law. He possessed the terrifying economy of a man who had long ago learned that the most effective legal maneuvers are completely silent until they strike. He filed the massive lawsuit on my behalf for exactly $153,400, the exact total of the 4 checks my father had fraudulently misappropriated. But Marcus didn't stop there. He aggressively tacked on massive legal fees and heavily documented consequential damages. This included a detailed financial breakdown of the 4 years of unnecessary, grueling employment I suffered, and the extreme emotional and physical stress of supporting myself through a rigorous biochemistry degree on money I shouldn't have needed to earn. I was not in the room when he filed the heavy stack of paperwork at the county courthouse. I was lying in my quiet hospital bed, peacefully watching a National Geographic documentary about deep-sea fish. Felt oddly appropriate. I was watching creatures that had brilliantly adapted to survive in complete, crushing darkness, building their own bioluminescent light from the inside out. The thing about severe civil claims involving financial fraud is that they immediately become public record. And public records, in a highly connected suburban world obsessed with gossip and the internet, have a terrifying way of being found almost instantly. By Tuesday afternoon, the carefully constructed, fake facade of my parents' perfect suburban life began to violently collapse. A wealthy family friend, someone who had attended my parents' lavish 25th anniversary party 2 years prior, someone my mother constantly posted photos with at the country club, sent my mother a concerned text message asking if the rumors about Robert being investigated for defrauding a family trust were true. Panic set in. Pure, unadulterated panic. My mother called my phone exactly 12 times that Tuesday. I didn't answer a single call. Finally, she sent a desperate, frantic text message. Can we please just talk, Liam? As a family? Please, people at the club are starting to stare at me. I typed back a single, cold sentence. Marcus Thorne is your only point of contact now. His office number is in the formal email he sent you. My father, terrified of losing his lucrative financial trading licenses, retained an expensive defense lawyer by the end of business on Wednesday. According to Marcus, my father's attorney immediately attempted to negotiate a quiet, private settlement out of court. They wanted to sweep the fraud under the rug before the regulatory boards caught wind of it. Marcus brought the written settlement offer to me on a Thursday afternoon. I had just been discharged from the hospital and was sitting across from him at a cheap folding table in my brand new apartment. A quiet, sunlit one-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old wood and fresh coffee. I had confidently signed the lease the exact day my remaining, unfrozen trust fund money cleared into my private account. The initial offer is for $110,000, Marcus said, sliding the heavy legal document across the table. Your father's attorney included a very pathetic letter explaining that the full $153,000 is not currently liquid, as it is tied up in the Porsche and the house equity. They are claiming that settling now for a lesser amount will avoid the immense expense and the highly damaging publicity of a full, drawn-out court hearing. I looked down at the insulting offer. Then, I looked up at Marcus's sharp eyes. What's your professional read on this? It's significantly below what you are legally owed, Marcus stated flatly. However, the counteroffer is entirely yours to decide. We can absolutely go after the rest. It will take longer. It will remain in the public record through the full discovery phase and the hearing. And given that your father's financial advisory practice has wealthy clients who religiously read the local business news, it will, in all likelihood, be extensively reported on. I thought about that. I thought about the 4 years of sheer misery, the duct-taped shoes, the freezing bus stops, and the champagne under the Eiffel Tower. I had them exactly where I wanted them. I had the power to completely destroy my father's career, to force them to sell the house and the cars to pay the massive legal judgments. But holding on to that radioactive anger was exhausting. I was a cancer patient about to start a grueling trial of chemotherapy. I didn't want my new life to be defined by their destruction. I wanted it to be defined by my freedom. Counter with 140,000, I said firmly. Give them exactly 72 hours to wire the funds, or we proceed to a full public trial and contact the regulatory board ourselves. Marcus smiled a terrifying, shark-like smile. Consider it done. They accepted the counteroffer within 24 hours. They were utterly terrified. The money arrived via a massive wire transfer on a bright Tuesday morning. I was sitting quietly at my small kitchen table, drinking a fresh cup of good, expensive coffee when the bank notification aggressively pinged on my phone screen. $140,000. The massive sum cleared directly into the private account that also held the remaining balance of the Freedom Fund from Grandma Beatrice. I sat with it for a long, silent time. I just stared at the glowing numbers on the screen, feeling the immense, life-altering weight of what it truly represented. It wasn't just money. It was my stolen years, returned to me. Then my phone buzzed again. It wasn't my parents. It was a direct message on Instagram from my brother, Julian. Since the explosive confrontation in the hospital room, Julian had been completely silent. Now he was finally reaching out. I opened the message cautiously. Liam, the message read, I just want you to know the absolute truth. I didn't know about the stolen college fund. I swear to God, I genuinely didn't know. Mom and Dad always told me your scholarship covered everything, and they told me the money for my apartment came from Dad's year-end bonuses. I thought I was just the favorite child. I didn't realize my entire life was being funded by your suffering and your money. I know an apology doesn't fix a single thing they did. I just needed to say it. I started seeing a therapist this week. I'm trying to figure out who I actually am without their money. I looked at the long paragraph for a very long time. Julian was the golden child, yes. He was arrogant, spoiled, and deeply entitled. But reading those words, I realized he was also a victim of their toxic manipulation. They had bought his love, crippling his ability to be an independent adult. I took a deep breath and replied, I believe you, Julian. That doesn't change the past, and it doesn't instantly fix our relationship, but I believe you. Keep going to therapy. Do the work. He didn't respond to that message immediately. He didn't demand instant forgiveness or try to force a reconciliation. He just hearted the message. It was a tiny, incredibly fragile step forward. I had opened a small door, just not the wide-open one my parents had demanded. 6 months have passed since the massive wire transfer completely severed my financial and emotional ties to my parents. I am currently exactly 6 months into my highly competitive research fellowship. The medical research I am doing is absolutely extraordinary. I spend my long, fulfilling days in the exact same hospital where I woke up terrified, not knowing if I would survive the week. I now work side by side with Dr. Sarah Vance and a brilliant, dedicated team of 7 other researchers, intensely studying the complex biological mechanisms that make glioblastomas like mine aggressively resistant to standard treatments. The profound, poetic irony of it is not lost on me. The exact same terrifying disease that completely collapsed my old life on that graduation stage is also the exact thing I am now passionately spending my new life studying. I don't know what to call that. Fate, destiny, or just the universe's twisted sense of humor. I've decided I don't need to put a neat label on it. My own rigorous medical treatment continues every single week. The intense concurrent radiation and chemotherapy are absolutely exhausting, draining my energy and making me violently ill some days. But the latest high-resolution MRI imaging showed that the residual tumor mass has not grown a single millimeter. Dr. Vance looked at the scans and used the word encouraging. I have learned over the past brutal 8 months to hold the word encouraging exactly as much as it weighs. No more, no less. It's not a guarantee of a long life, but it's enough hope to keep fighting. I live completely alone in my quiet apartment, which I find I absolutely love. My apartment has massive windows with good, natural light. I have a sturdy wooden bookshelf that I built entirely from scratch using a confusing YouTube tutorial and the completely wrong size screwdriver. I've started cooking actual nutritious food, grilling salmon, roasting vegetables, which sounds like a minor detail, but after 4 years of surviving on toxic ramen noodles, it feels like a massive, daily victory. I bought a brand new pair of expensive, comfortable running shoes at full retail price without having to calculate what essential bill I was going to sacrifice to afford them. My parents have not successfully contacted me since the heavy legal settlement was finalized. My mother sent a single, pathetic text message 3 days after the $140,000 wire transfer cleared into my account. It read, "I hope someday when you have children of your own, you'll finally understand that we loved you in the only way we knew how." I read the message. I thought about the sheer, unyielding narcissism required to send a text like that after stealing $150,000. I thought about it for a few days. Then I finally replied, "I know you did. I also know that your way wasn't nearly enough, and it almost killed me. I hope you find a better way to live your life. Do not contact me again." She hasn't responded. My father hasn't reached out at all. I honestly don't know if his silence is born of damaged pride, deep shame, or some complex combination of the two that doesn't have a clean, easy name. I've completely stopped trying to categorize his cowardly silences. It is simply no longer my burden to carry. Julian and I, however, have talked twice on the phone. Real, difficult, awkward conversations. He is still in intense therapy, trying to unravel 26 years of being emotionally stunted by their toxic money. We are not close. Not yet. Maybe we will never be close in the way normal brothers are supposed to be, but we are cautiously talking. We are setting boundaries. That is something I can live with. Grandpa Arthur and I have dinner together every single Sunday without fail. He drives his rattling, 10-year-old Buick to my apartment building and brings something incredibly delicious he's cooked from scratch. Usually a heavy pot roast or a rich vegetable soup that is somehow both extremely simple and life-changingly good. We eat at my small kitchen table, argue passionately about local politics, and talk extensively about Grandma Beatrice. I am constantly learning more about her every week. I learn about her fierce stubbornness, her loud, unapologetic laugh, the way she once aggressively returned a piece of highly expensive, flashy jewelry my grandfather had bought her because she thought the money would be vastly better used helping a local charity. "She would have really liked you, Liam," Grandpa Arthur said to me one Sunday, looking at me with that deep, unwavering pride. He said it in a specific tone that meant something much larger than the simple sentence itself. "I have her exact face," I replied, smiling gently. "Much more than that," Arthur said, placing his rough hand over mine on the table. "You have her absolute, unshakable sense of what things are truly worth in this life." I think about the letter Beatrice left for me, the letter that accompanied the trust fund documents. She had written it in her own elegant, looping handwriting. She called the money the Freedom Fund, the freedom to completely leave whatever situation harms you, she had written on the thick stationery. The freedom to proudly stay exactly where you are valued. The freedom to aggressively build something that belongs only to you. She had never even met me. She had died before I took my very first breath in this world. But she had looked far ahead into a dark future she would never see, and she decided that whoever this boy would turn out to be, he absolutely deserved a clear, fully funded way out of the toxicity she knew her daughter-in-law would create. I have that handwritten letter professionally framed on my living room wall. The frame is cheap, just a plain black plastic one I bought from the local drugstore. Someday, when I have more time, I'll get a much nicer one. But for right now, hanging there in the sunlight of my own home, it's exactly what it needs to be. I collapsed in front of 3,000 cheering people on what was supposed to be the absolute best, most triumphant day of my life. I was bleeding, terrified, and broken. And I woke up to find the only single person in my family who had bothered to stay. The rest of it, the massive stolen money, the heavy legal settlement, the aggressive civil filing, the ridiculous Instagram post about the Louvre, that's not the real story here. The real story is my grandfather's heavy, steady hand wrapping around mine in the ICU. The real story is the wrinkled navy suit, the coffee-stained pocket square, the absolute, undeniable fact that he had been sitting in that incredibly uncomfortable plastic hospital chair for 3 days in the exact same clothes, refusing to leave the room for even a second because he knew someone needed to be there when I finally opened my eyes. The real story is that when I finally looked up the true definition of family, the real one, not the fake, weaponized one my toxic parents used as a collection plate to fund their luxury lifestyle, it fit Grandpa Arthur exactly. Everything else in this life is just legal paperwork. And trust me, I had very, very good documentation. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there who might be going through the exact same thing. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this incredible journey. Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to legally or emotionally cut off the people who were supposed to protect you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Remember, your peace is worth protecting no matter the cost.